Right now, somewhere in the world, inside this massively pressurized steel vessel, water is being superheated to like well over 300 degrees Celsius.
Oh, easily. It's a completely extreme environment.
Yeah, and this heat isn't coming from a coal fire or anything normal. It is coming from the furious, just basically incomprehensible violence of uranium atoms splitting apart in a nuclear chain reaction.
Right.
And the only thing, literally the single only thing stopping that apocalyptic radioactive heat from instantly melting down the entire facility and poisoning the groundwater is a metal wall that's less than a millimeter thick.
Which is honestly a profound amount of trust to place in a fraction of a millimeter of material.
It's insane.
It is. I mean, we are talking about an environment where the physical and radioactive pressures would just completely disintegrate almost anything else we know of.
Okay, let's unpack this because today's deep dive is dedicated entirely to the metal making up that paper-thin, indestructible wall. We're looking at this fascinating stack of research, primarily a document simply titled 40zirconium.pdf. And that our mission today is element 40 on the periodic table, zirconium.
A very unassuming silvery gray transition metal.
Exactly. I mean, most people listening to this right now probably haven't thought about it since high school chemistry, if you've thought about it at all.
Fair point.
But the sources we have today frame this element in a way that just completely blew my mind. Like, the main document actually gives zirconium a musical genre.
Yeah, the progressive rock comparison.
Yes, it calls it progressive rock, citing its complex rhythmic guitar and layered geological rhythm shifts, which is just wild for a chemistry paper.
It is an incredibly poetic way to describe the atomic structure of a transition metal, for sure. But it actually captures the essence of what we are looking at really well.
How so?
Well, if we connect it to the bigger picture, elements have distinct chemical personalities, and zirconium is the ultimate sealed guardian. Its entire existence is basically defined by its unyielding capacity for containment.
The sealed guardian, I love that. And we are going to trace this whole idea of the sealed guardian all the way from its birth in dying stars, down to the oldest rocks on Earth, into, honestly, the dental crowns in your mouth, and finally into the core of those nuclear reactors.
That's quite the journey.
It really is. But to understand how this metal got so unimaginably tough, we really have to look at where it came from. And the source material points out right away that zirconium was actually not produced in the Big Bang.
No, it wasn't. The early universe was a very, very simple place, chemically speaking. You basically just had this massive soup of hydrogen, some helium, and maybe trace amounts of lithium.
Right, just the really light stuff.
Exactly. That was it. So to forge something as heavy and complex as element 40, you need the crushing pressure and intense heat of stellar alchemy.
You need stars.
You need stars to live, age, and enter their final stages. The text notes that zirconium is primarily born through something called the slow neutron capture process in evolved stars.
Okay, wait. I actually need to pause you there because I was reading about this slow neutron capture process and I totally hit a wall with the physics.
Sure, it gets a bit dense.
Yeah, like if a star is bombarding an atom with neutrons and the atom, captures a neutron, it just gets heavier.
Right, it becomes a heavier isotope.
But it wouldn't become a new element. Because to get a completely new element, you have to add protons. So how on earth does throwing neutrons at something create element 40?
That is the crucial missing link in how most people visualize stellar fusion, actually.
Yeah.
You are absolutely right that adding a neutron just makes a heavier isotope.
Right.
But in this specific environment, the process is slow. And that means a nucleus captures a neutron and then just kind of has time to sit there in this unstable, heavy state.
Right.
And because it's unstable, it undergoes beta decay. So inside the nucleus, that newly captured neutron spontaneously turns into a proton, and in the process, it spits out an electron.
Wow. So it sneaks in as a neutron, but then flips into a proton once it's already inside the nucleus.
Precisely. It's a bit of atomic sleight of hand. And the moment it gains that new proton, it moves one step up the periodic table.
That is so cool.
Right. And the star does this slowly, just atom by atom, neutron capture by neutron capture, beta decay by beta decay, steadily marching up the elemental ladder until it forges zirconium. It is a very slow, methodical, cosmic forge.
So these evolved stars finally die, they blow their outer layers into the cosmos, and this freshly minted zirconium just drifts through space until it becomes part of the debris cloud that, eventually forms our solar system.
Exactly. Which brings us to Earth.
Right, because on Earth, zirconium doesn't just sit around as a pure metal. It binds with silicon and oxygen to form this incredibly durable mineral called zircon.
Zirconium silicate, yes.
Yeah.
And this is where that sealed guardian personality first really emerges.
Because of the early Earth, right?
Yeah, the Hadean Eon. It was a hellish, just completely molten landscape. Tectonic plates were constantly recycling, melting down, and destroying the planet's early crust.
Like a planetary blender.
Basically, yeah, almost nothing survived from that era.
Yeah.
Except for these microscopic crystals of zircon.
The source note, they're basically geological time capsules, preserving records of the planet's earliest history.
Right, they hold up incredibly well.
And the way they do this is through a mechanism called uranium-lead dating. And I actually want to test an analogy I thought of when I was reading how this specific part works. Tell me if this tracks.
Oh, absolutely. Let's hear it.
Okay, so I picture the formation of a zircon crystal, like an ultra-exclusive nightclub bouncer at the atomic level.
Okay, a bouncer.
Yeah, so the magma is cooling, the crystal lattice is forming, which is like the door to the club. Uranium swims up to the door, the bouncer checks the VIP list and says, yep, you're cool, come on in.
All right.
But then Lid tries to get in, and the bouncer physically blocks the door and says, absolutely not. Lead gets completely turned away. So when the club door is finally shut, there is uranium inside, but zero lead.
That is, I mean, the premise of your analogy is completely solid, but we should probably look at how the bouncer actually decides who gets in.
Right, it's not just arbitrary.
Exactly. It isn't arbitrary at all. It comes down to atomic architecture specifically, ionic radius, and electrostatic charge.
Meaning, like, the physical size and the electrical pull of the atoms.
Exactly that. When the zircon crystal forms, it creates a very rigid, very specific geometric scaffolding. Zirconium ions have a +4 charge and a very specific radius.
Right.
Uranium ions also happen to have a +4 charge, and their radius is similar enough that they can physically substitute for zirconium in the scaffolding.
Ah, so they literally hold the right VIP pass, chemically speaking.
They do. Lead, however, typically has a +2 charge and a significantly larger ionic radius. It physically cannot fit into the empty slots in the molecular geometry.
It's too big.
Right. It would be like trying to force a square peg into a small round hole.
So the crystal locks shut, and we know for a fact that it is completely decontaminated of lead at that exact moment.
Exactly.
But uranium is famously radioactive. It decays over time. And the end product of uranium decay is, wait for it, lead.
Which turns that crystal into an infallible, perfectly sealed stopwatch.
That is amazing.
It is. Millions or even billions of years later, a geologist can find that exact zircon crystal, crack it open, and measure the ratio of uranium to lead inside.
Because they know there was no lead to begin with.
Right. Because we know the exact half-life of uranium, and because we know the crystal started with 0 lead, every single atom of lead inside that crystal is a direct tick of the clock.
It is honestly mind-blowing that something the size of a grain of sand can hold a billion-year timeline intact like that.
It's one of our most important geological tools.
But the document mentions it only survives all this time because of its, going back to the music metaphor, layered geological rhythm shifts. The progressive rock thing again.
Right, the shifting structures.
Yes, as zirconium shifts from a hexagonal close-packed crystal structure to a body-centered cubic structure under extreme heat, which, sounds like a lot of dense jargon. Why does shifting in structure even matter?
Well, think about how buildings are designed in earthquake zones. If a skyscraper is completely rigid, a massive tremor will just snap it in half. The building needs a way to absorb and dissipate the energy, usually through built-in flexibility.
So it sways instead of breaking.
Exactly. Crystals face a similar problem under tectonic stress.
So the hexagonal structure is like the rigid building.
Yes. At room temperature, the atoms are packed together in tight hexagons. It is incredibly strong, but it's relatively stiff.
Okay.
But if that crystal gets subducted deep into the Earth's mantle and exposed to just apocalyptic heat and pressure, staying rigid would cause it to shatter.
Right, it would just break apart.
So it absorbs that thermal energy by literally rearranging its atomic scaffolding. It shifts into a body-centered cubic shape.
Which is literally just a cube with an atom in the middle of it, right?
That's it. And that shape has slightly more internal space, more vibrational freedom for the atoms to move around as they heat up.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, it dynamically adapts its internal geometry to just ride out the tectonic apocalypse without losing its overall integrity.
Okay, so we've established that zirconium is forged in dead stars, survives the molten birth of our planet, and acts as this unbreakable vault for deep time.
A very impressive resume.
Seriously. So let's look at where else humanity has decided to use this indestructible cosmic vault. We dig it up out of the crust, we refine it, and we put it directly into our gums.
The grand transition from deep geology to modern dentistry.
It seems like such a wild leap. Like, the source document emphasizes that zirconium has absolutely zero essential biological role. It is a complete biological blank slate.
None whatsoever.
Plants don't use it, microbes completely ignore it. Our bodies don't need it for bone, blood, or DNA.
Yeah.
But we use zirconium in dental crowns, ceramic implants, joint replacement.
We use it extensively, yes.
I just struggle to understand why putting a heavy transition metal into sensitive biological tissue isn't a massive health hazard. Like, we know heavy metals like lead and mercury are incredibly toxic because they mess with our chemistry.
Well, heavy metal toxicity usually happens because those elements are chemically promiscuous.
Promiscuous?
Yeah, they get into your bloodstream and start binding with proteins and enzymes, shutting down normal cellular functions. But what's fascinating here is that zirconium's total lack of a biological role is its greatest superpower.
Interesting.
It is the exact opposite of promiscuous. It is incredibly disciplined.
Discipline how, exactly?
It comes down to its valence electrons. Those are the electrons on the outermost shell of the atom that dictate how it reacts with other things.
The ones that make the chemical bonds.
Right. When zirconium metal is exposed to oxygen, it instantly undergoes a reaction to form zirconium dioxide, or zirconia.
Which is that tough white ceramic material dentists use.
Correct. In this state, zirconium takes a +4 oxidation state. It has basically shared its 4 outer electrons to bond with oxygen. And once that chemical handshake happens, the valence shell is locked down tight.
Oh, so it's done making deals.
Exactly. There are no loose electrons looking to interact with the acids in your food or your saliva or your bloodstream.
So it's basically pulling up the drawbridge.
It forms a totally impenetrable, completely biocompatible shell. When your immune system sends out its chemical sensors to scan a zirconia dental implant, it literally slides right off.
Because there's nothing to grab onto.
Right. The immune system registers this unreactive ceramic matrix, finds absolutely nothing to interact with, and just ignores it completely. It doesn't trigger inflammation or rejection.
It is the sealed guardian doing its job perfectly again. Like, it guards the vulnerable nerve of your tooth by just standing there, refusing to engage with any chemical drama in your mouth.
That's a great way to put it.
And it just gives us incredible physical strength and total chemical stability.
And we are utilizing this complete biological apathy to our advantage. We take an element that life on Earth literally evolved to ignore, and we use its quiet, unreactive nature to repair our own broken biology.
Which is brilliant. But the deep dive source takes us from the dentist's chair into a much, much more volatile arena next.
Yes, the reactor core.
Because that exact same trait, that impenetrable, totally unreactive nature, is what makes zirconium the only logical choice for holding back the terrifying forces in a nuclear reactor. The document literally subtitles this section, "The Reactor's Armor."
The scaling up of its unreactive nature here is just fascinating. I mean, a nuclear core is essentially an environment trying to tear itself apart chemically, thermally, and radioactively all at once.
Yeah, the physical stats listed in the source are staggering. It says zirconium metal melts at 1,855 degrees Celsius.
Which is exceptionally high.
And it doesn't even boil until over 4,400 degrees Celsius. So it handles the raw thermal output of a nuclear core without a problem.
Easily.
But, high melting points aren't totally unique. Like, tungsten has a much higher melting point.
Okay.
So why is zirconium the undisputed king of nuclear fuel cladding?
Because in a reactor, thermal resistance is really only half the battle. The other half involves controlling subatomic particles. To understand why zirconium is chosen, we really have to look at the mechanics of nuclear fission. You have these uranium fuel rods sitting in water. When a uranium atom splits, it releases energy, but it also fires off rogue neutrons.
Right, and those rogue neutrons hit other uranium atoms, causing them to split, which releases more neutrons, and you get the chain reaction that boils the water and gives us electricity.
Exactly. So you have this contradictory engineering problem. You have to put a physical wall around the uranium fuel to keep the highly radioactive waste from dissolving into the water and to protect the uranium from corroding.
You need a barrier.
But that wall cannot block the neutrons. If your physical barrier absorbs those neutrons, the chain reaction stops dead and your reactor shuts down.
This makes me think of a greenhouse, actually.
A greenhouse.
Yeah, if you have a greenhouse, the glass is this selectively transparent barrier, right? It lets the sunlight pass right through to keep the plants growing, but it physically blocks the wind, the rain, and the weather from getting in and destroying the garden.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
In a reactor, the zirconium cladding is basically the glass. It lets the neutrons pass right through to keep the nuclear fire going, but it completely blocks the radioactive weather and the corrosive water from mixing.
That is a highly functional way to visualize it, yeah.
Yeah.
Provided we look at the actual physics of why zirconium acts like glass to a neutron.
Which is what, exactly?
In nuclear physics, we measure how likely an atom is to absorb a neutron using a concept called nuclear cross-section. You can essentially think of it as the physical size of the target the nucleus presents to an incoming neutron.
Like trying to throw a baseball through a chain-link fence versus throwing it at a solid brick wall.
Exactly that. Most structural metals, like steel or titanium, have very large nuclear cross-sections. To a neutron, they look like solid brick walls. They just absorb the neutrons.
And that would kill the reaction.
Yes. But zirconium has an incredibly tiny nuclear cross-section. The subatomic geometry of its nucleus is practically invisible to a slow-moving neutron. The neutron just flies right through the atomic gaps.
The document lists a bunch of isotopes here, actually, zirconium 90, 91, 92, 94, and 96. Why does the source break these out specifically? Does the cross-section change depending on the isotope? The opposite, actually. Isotopes are just variations of the element with different numbers of neutrons already in the nucleus.
Okay, right.
What is remarkable about zirconium is that across all these naturally occurring variations, its nuclear cross-section remains exceptionally low. Even with varying internal structures, it refuses to present a large target.
It stays invisible.
Right. Without zirconium alloys to act as that invisible scaffolding, designing efficient, water-cooled nuclear reactors would be an infinitely harder engineering challenge. It really is the ultimate reactor wall. It contains the danger, resists the heat, and just lets the physics happen. It's why the source material classifies zirconium as economically and strategically vital. Like it says, we rely on it for aerospace, for high-temperature chemical engineering, and for our baseload energy infrastructure.
We do. But, the source material doesn't just praise the engineering, it forces us to confront the other side of the coin, too.
Right.
The paradox of containment.
The ethical weight.
Yeah.
Yeah, the document gets quite heavy here. It points out that zirconium itself isn't highly toxic, but acquiring it is a massive environmental hurdle.
Because it doesn't exist in a vacuum. The heavy mineral sands that we have to mine to extract zircon are naturally laced with radioactive impurities.
It's all mixed together.
Uranium and thorium sit right alongside it in the Earth's crust.
So just to get the perfect container, to get this pristine zirconium, the supply chain forces us to sift through radioactive dirt. We literally have to manage radioactive waste before we even build a reactor.
And once we do build the reactor, zirconium ties itself to an immense web of ethical complexities. By enabling nuclear power, this element is intrinsically linked to the realities of spent nuclear fuel, the catastrophic risks of facility accidents,
Yeah.
the geopolitical anxiety of weapons proliferation, and the really daunting reality of long-term stewardship.
So what does this all mean? Because it really made me stop and think. Does relying on such a perfect container, this flawless sealed guardian, make humanity dangerously arrogant?
That is a very valid concern.
We look at the stats, we see a metal that won't melt, won't rust, and won't absorb neutrons, and we think, great, we can bottle a miniature star. But are we just outsourcing our safety to a chemical property? The metal won't fail, but the systems around it can.
This raises an important question, and you are touching on the core philosophical view of the source text. It approaches this impartially. It doesn't tell the reader that nuclear energy is inherently good or inherently evil.
Right, it's neutral on that.
What it does is highlight that zirconium enables us to build systems that demand absolute perfection from us. Zirconium will do its job. It will stand fast.
But we might not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What about the humans running the cooling pumps? What about the societies tasked with burying the waste for 10,000 years?
We build these barriers to protect ourselves from the fire, but then we have to maintain the barriers forever.
It is the heavy moral weight of containment. Zirconium forces us to look at our need for absolute barriers. When you utilize a material that essentially promises never to fail, you are committing generations of human beings to manage the consequences of what happens if the human side of the equation falters.
Which brings a whole new layer of meaning to the word endurance. Throughout this deep dive, from the oldest rocks on Earth to the ceramic in our mouths, we usually think of endurance as passive survival, just weathering the storm.
But endurance is highly active. To endure is to actively resist dissolution. It requires holding your structure and your integrity under immense continuous pressure.
Wow.
Whether that is the tectonic crushing of the Earth's mantle, the acidic environment of human biology, or the furious radiation of a uranium core.
Zirconium really is the ultimate symbol of controlled power. It is the invisible scaffolding of the modern world, quietly holding the line between chaotic energy and usable structure.
It is a remarkable journey from the slow neutron capture of evolved stars directly to the infrastructure that lights our homes.
And it genuinely changes how you look at the mundane things around you.
Right.
Element 40 is out there right now, just doing the heavy lifting so we don't have to.
It does leave us with one final, rather provocative thought to consider, though.
So,
We know zirconium perfectly holds the physical boundaries of our most dangerous technologies. It is the ultimate physical containment wall.
right.
But it forces us to ask, what are the invisible boundaries, the social, political, and psychological containment walls that we blindly rely on every day to keep our modern lives from melting down?
And unlike a millimeter of zirconium, how much heat can those invisible walls really take before they crack?